Health, truth, hope. In a world where billions of people do not have a clue about the forces that control their health, these people go about their day in a life and death struggle, while minds that are calculating and unsympathetic make decisions that will affect their very lives. A new day begins. There are many questions, but few answers. But still there's hope. This is the big secret. Each year, millions of people die in the United States from chronic diseases, yet many of these deaths are preventable. Sure, we all know that smoking is bad for your health. As a matter of fact, it's probably no surprise that nearly 500,000 people die each year in the United States from smoking-related causes. That's 1 in every 5 deaths in the US. But what if I told you that you might be at an even greater risk of death? According to the Center for Disease Control, half of all adults in the United States have a chronic health condition. These are startling statistics, yet people go about their lives unaware of the things that affect their health. There are those who try to manipulate and influence factors that have a direct impact on your health. For these people, corporate profits are more important than your well-being. Have you ever wondered about the startling rise in chronic diseases over the past 20 years? We've all heard people say, "You used to not hear about all the diseases we have today." Were they here all along and we're just getting better at diagnosing them? Or are more people developing chronic conditions like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke? In this documentary, we will take a look at several important events in history and note an interesting correlation in the rise of certain diseases. In some cases, we will provide a little background to make the information more meaningful. There's a lot of information and a lot of misinformation on most of what we're going to cover. Trust me, we will only scratch the surface on some of these issues. So why did we create this documentary? Our goal is to challenge the status quo and to start a conversation about healthcare and nutrition in the United States. You may be surprised by some of the information presented, but I encourage you to do your own research and to talk to others who do not have a financial interest in your well-being. Let's get started.
Man, how do I take a positive spin on the fact that we're being murdered?
I know this is depressing, but it's also very important.
I know, and it is. It's really depressing, but people need to know this stuff. You know, I grew up, I was never interested in nutrition. I didn't know anything about it. You know, I ate McDonald's all the time and microwave meals. And I mean, I had no idea. You know, I didn't care at all about nutrition. And I was in college. I was probably sitting there drinking a Coke and eating Cheez-Its. And I was taking a cell biology class. And so we're like learning about the cell and DNA replication. And I mean, it's just like fascinating. And the professor, as he's explaining all this stuff, I'm doing all this research, I had this little like aha moment or whatever about nutrition and processed foods. And I ended up writing my senior thesis paper was on that topic. And so I was basically theorizing, you know, and I've talked about trans fats. I talked about partially hydrogenated oils. I talked about the lack of minerals in the soil depletion. I mean, I talked about all these different things. And at the time, it was my thesis. It was all theory. It was all like I was doing this research and kind of coming up with these ideas and saying that there's a link between processed foods and chronic disease. And it was just really neat after I graduated, seeing all of these things that I talked about in that paper start coming into the mainstream. And they're talking about trans fats, and they're talking, you know, all of this stuff that I had researched, high fructose corn syrup, was all becoming more widely accepted. And now, you know, 10 years later, there's people all over the United States and really all over the world, like you said, all kind of saying the same things. Even though we've never talked to each other, but we're all just kind of coming to the same conclusions.
John D. Rockefeller was born July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York. His father, William A. Rockefeller, was a doctor who claimed that he could cure cancers, and charged up to $25 per treatment. He was gone for months at a time and would return to his family with substantial sums of cash. In 1865, at the age of 24, Rockefeller bought an existing oil company and gained complete control of the business. Rockefeller was convinced that oil would soon be very profitable. He immediately moved to expand his business by taking over smaller oil companies, thus forming a cartel with the power to control oil production and delivery in the United States. That's a quick lesson on how John D. Rockefeller became the richest man in the world. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Rockefeller Foundation turned its attention to the acquisition of pharmaceutical companies. They started buying them up in order to profit from their patented drugs. However, in 1912, vitamins were discovered, and we began the long process of understanding their health benefits. Keep in mind that by today's standards, the practice of modern medicine was in its infancy. These pharmaceutical companies had developed and patented drugs to treat a variety of common ailments. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, doctors soon recognized scurvy, beriberi, rickets, and other conditions as specific deficiencies rather than diseases. Unfortunately for pharmaceutical companies, vitamins cannot be patented. Now, the pharmaceutical cartels were faced with a dilemma. How do you promote the sale of extremely profitable patented drugs over natural remedies like vitamins? The answer? You find a way to control doctors and influence what they prescribe. You might think that this sounds like some sort of science fiction movie, but that's exactly what happened in the United States. Slowly and methodically, medical practices moved to a profit-driven system promoting pharmaceutical drug sales and profitable surgery over curative medical practices. Basically, the long-term management of diseases was found to be more profitable than efforts to cure diseases. In the early 1900s, there were a number of substandard medical schools in the U.S. that taught some rather questionable medical practices, such as electrotherapy. Many of these schools offered limited training and medical degrees that were really not worth the paper on which they were written. In 1910, the Carnegie Foundation decided to focus on reforming healthcare and commissioned Abraham Flexner to study medical schools in the United States. You may be surprised to learn that Flexner had no medical training. Rather, he was one of the country's leading educators. The Carnegie Foundation gave him a unique perspective from which to study the healthcare industry. During his research, Flexner visited every medical school in the U.S. The results forever changed medicine in this country. The Flexner Report, as was to become known, was published in 1910. In it, he criticized most of the 155 medical schools in the U.S. and called for higher standards, more hands-on clinical work, and more research. That, in and of itself, was a good thing. And at first glance, you might think that we're better off today because of his findings. Well, in many ways we are, but let's dig a little deeper. The Rockefeller Foundation seized this opportunity to promote their own agenda. They used their influence to help pass legislation putting the American Medical Association, a private institution, in charge of overseeing medical training and practice. And how exactly did they do that? Well, some things never change. Just like today, they used campaign donations and lobbyists to further their agenda. In exchange for large campaign contributions, legislators gave the Rockefellers just what they wanted: the AMA in charge of medicine in the U.S. Unfortunately, the AMA was also heavily influenced by the Rockefeller Foundation, which, as you remember, was looking for a way to promote their patented drugs. Consequently, the AMA promoted allopathic medicine to the point that it became the only approved form of medicine taught in the U.S. Consequently, doctors began prescribing the Rockefeller Foundation's patented medicines to manage, not cure, illnesses and diseases. As a result of the Flexner Report and the newfound authority of the AMA, medical schools were under intense pressure to conform to the wishes of the Rockefeller Foundation. As I mentioned a moment ago, in some cases that reform was badly needed. However, other forms of medicine quickly became outdated and were labeled accordingly. The Rockefeller Foundation began awarding large grants to medical schools that taught allopathic medicine. Schools that still embraced alternative forms of medicine could not compete financially and were forced to close. In the end, half of the medical schools in the U.S. were closed.
You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome to episode 286 of the Corbett Report podcast, Rockefeller Medicine. Quote, "The crisis in today's healthcare system is deeply rooted in the interwoven history of modern medicine and corporate capitalism. The major groups and forces that shaped the medical system sowed the seeds of the crisis we now face. The medical profession and other medical interest groups each tried to make medicine serve their own narrow economic and social interests. Foundations and other corporate class institutions insisted that medicine serve the needs of their corporate capitalist society. The dialectic of their common efforts and their clashes, and the economic and political forces set in motion by their actions, shaped the system as it grew. Out of this history emerged a medical system that poorly serves society's health needs." End quote.
And, like you say, the Rockefeller medicine, maybe it has to do with that. They've really just taken preventive medicine out of there. And if you think about it, if you practice, it's not in their interest to practice preventative medicine because they make less money if they do that. So it's that simple. So, if you don't get sick ever, you're not going to the doctor, you're not giving them any money. And they'll notice, with these insurance companies and stuff, they have actuaries and they have people who really keep track of the numbers. And they've probably got it worked down to a science where they will see that if they start doing preventative medicine, they take a real big hit to their checkbook. And so there's basically what it is. It comes down to, in modern medicine, I consider it just a violation of the Hippocratic Oath, where doctors have, I really think unwittingly, I don't think it's their fault because they don't really control the money system, but they are controlled by money. But we have a system that is controlled by money, and the money controls them. And the people making the business money decisions are overriding the doctor's decision.
Emphasis on surgery, emphasis on medications, and really a almost disdain for the idea of preventative care.
What it all boils down to, quite frankly, is that we are victims of a Machiavellian medical monopoly. We don't have a free medical marketplace. We haven't had a free medical marketplace since the early 1900s, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Quite frankly, if you're not angry, you're simply not paying attention, or you're not educated with the proper information, and that's really not your fault because that's the result of a monopoly, right? Inside of a monopoly, you are spoon-fed what the powers that be want you to know, which is often very different than the actual truth of the matter.
It's because we have a system of medicine that is fundamentally stupid. Consider how the system works. First, we do nothing to prevent disease. We wait for people to get sick. Once they are sick, instead of curing their disease, we suppress the symptoms by prescribing toxic chemicals and doing surgery. Then the toxicity of the chemicals makes the patient even sicker, creating entirely new diseases. And then finally, to hide the fact that the patient is now sicker than when they started, we don't call these new problems diseases, we call them side effects.
If you've been listening to my lectures for last year, you know that my passion is our kids. And experts tell us that our children are going to be the first generation of Americans that do not live as long as their parents. This is a catastrophic prediction of biblical proportions. We're talking about the Great Flood. We're talking about all of Egypt's firstborn dying because Pharaoh refused to release the Hebrew slaves. Can you imagine everybody in this room burying their children? This tells us how terribly the medical profession has failed us.
Millions of people have been prescribed a class of drugs called statins. These drugs are supposed to lower cholesterol and thereby prevent heart attacks. Well, first of all, do they lower cholesterol? And the answer is yeah, they lower cholesterol. But here's a very important question. Do they prevent heart attacks? No, they don't. Are they safe? No, they aren't. So if you're taking a statin, you're taking a drug to prevent heart attacks that does not prevent heart attacks. And further, you're taking a drug that is not safe and does you harm. Now, does that make sense?
I hate statin drugs. I absolutely hate them. And yesterday I gave a long talk explaining, I mean, there's so much evidence. They cause so many problems. And they certainly don't, it's not a fair trade-off. You'd never win, in my opinion, almost under any circumstance, taking a statin drug, given all the damage it's going to cause, compared to the slight chance that you might avoid a heart attack. So many problems. And of course, cholesterol itself is a key one, because cholesterol is so important to all the cells, especially the neurons. The brain has 25% of the body's cholesterol, a small percentage of the body's mass, like 3% or something.
They push those drugs to these doctors for sales. They want to get as many people on these particular medications as possible. An example of that is how they've done with with cholesterol. How used to a healthy cholesterol was one level, and it was, as long as you were that level, it was perfectly fine. Well, they kept lowering the standard, lowering the, oh, well, if your cholesterol is that, then, oh, you need a statin.
We've been convinced by about 35, 36 years of pharmaceutical profiteering that cholesterol is the antichrist and that statin drugs are a savior, when, quite frankly, just the reverse is true. Low cholesterol levels are associated with an increased chance of death, an increased chance of cancer, high percentage of birth defects, peripheral neuropathy, short temper and aggressive behavior, kidney failure, and dementia. Let's take a look at this. Alzheimer's was virtually non-existent until right around 1940, and then it started to show up, and then after 1980, man, it skyrocketed. It rose from obscurity to become the 6th, 5th, or 4th leading cause of death, depending on how you crunch the numbers, currently in 2016. And man, it has skyrocketed.
But then let's look at something very fundamental. What is the point of paying attention to cholesterol? The point is said to be prevention of heart attack and stroke, isn't it? All right. Do you know what will cut your risk, my risk, her risk, everybody's risk of heart attack and stroke by 75 to 80%? And you don't have to swallow a thing? Do you know what that might be? It's called donating blood. There is research on that from the 1990s, late 1990s. A whole bunch of guys followed for an average of 8 years each. The guys who donated blood once or twice a year had 75% less heart attack and stroke during that time. Now, if word ever got out about that, what would happen to the sales of anti-cholesterol medications? Because anti-cholesterol medications cannot drop the heart attack and stroke risk by 75 to 80%.
Cholesterol is not the antichrist. Cholesterol is so important that our bodies make it. Every cell wall in the body is made from cholesterol. Cholesterol makes the cells in our body waterproof. This is very important. Everybody thinks cholesterol is a fat, but cholesterol really is an alcohol. But it doesn't really perform like most alcohols do. It's a little different. Cholesterol is extremely important for your health. All of your sex hormones are made from cholesterol. They're made from it. You don't have enough cholesterol, you don't have enough sex hormone. So guess what also has been a fallout of fat-free diets and statin drugs? Not only does your brain dry up and you get Alzheimer's disease, but your sex hormones dry up. So guess what? Erectile dysfunction. Women get hot flushes now for 5 years instead of their grandparents did. Why? Because you have a bad gene? No, because you don't have enough cholesterol.
They tell you take this statin drug and go home and exercise every day. And that's a really bad combination. In fact, papers have shown that exercise is of no benefit if you're taking a statin drug. But if you aren't taking a statin drug, then the exercise is good for you, you know? So it basically derails your opportunity to improve yourself through these other things that are known to be beneficial. They're no longer beneficial because of the statin.
How many of you heard of Alzheimer's disease? It's a physician-caused disease. Mark my words, in the next 2 years, maybe even next week, it'll pop up in the newspaper. There's more than enough information to prove that it's a physician-caused disease. Alzheimer's disease is a disease that did not occur, even by another name, 40 years ago. It only became recognized as a disease in 1979, 25 years ago. Today, it's the number 4 killer of adults over the age of 65. If you listen to your doctor and you give up eggs and eat egg beaters, if you give up butter and eat margarine, if you rip the chicken skin off your chicken before you eat it, eat tofu instead of red meat, the odds are you're going to get what? Alzheimer's disease.
Fascinates me that they've been able to do this incredible sales, tactic to convince all the doctors and all the patients that, oh my God, I have to take this drug. And when you look, actually, if you look at statistical, I'm always looking at correlations. Fascinatingly enough, if you look at the correlation over time from hospital discharge data that are maintained by the US CDC, over time of high cholesterol or high LDL, LDL's going up exactly in step with glyphosate usage on corn and soy crops. So I think glyphosate is causing our problem that we have now with too much cholesterol in our blood. And it's not going up. If you look at heart attack, it's completely unrelated. It's like doing something completely different from what the cholesterol's doing. So here they say, oh yeah, high cholesterol correlated, heart attack. It's not true. The high cholesterol is not correlated with a heart attack.
But in this country, what's kind of taken over the news media? What's taken over the pharmacologic media? What's taken over your doctor's office? We hear it every day, 15 times a day to watch television. Statin, cholesterol down. I mean, the commercials regarding statins and cholesterol are almost as bad as the ones regarding erectile dysfunction. So the cholesterol-centric idea of reducing heart disease is really misleading. I'll show you some data in a few minutes that if you look at your cholesterol level and you treat it with a statin, 50 to 75% of you still have a heart attack. So we have reached a limit in our ability to reduce cardiovascular disease based on our present medical treatments. We are pharmacologically driven. We are not a preventative medicine country. 1 in every 3 deaths in this country is a cardiovascular death. So it's 2,200 deaths per day just from heart disease and stroke. And we can reduce that if we did the right things to 70 to 80%. And I can say this now with some degree of authority that the methodologies, the traditional care, the treatments, and even some of the surgeries that we've been doing for the last 25 to 30 years in cardiovascular disease are misdirected. They're obsolete, and they're very limited in their scope.
Alzheimer's disease has long been believed to be irreversible, but that might finally be about to change, thanks to the work of Dr. Dale Bredesen, whose patients showed subjective memory improvement within 3 to 6 months of treatment. Dr. Bredesen believes that Alzheimer's disease is caused by numerous factors.
Okay, so this is a very exciting time because we're witnessing the first reversals of cognitive decline in early Alzheimer's disease and pre-Alzheimer's conditions like MCI and SCI. So this is an exciting time where we're able to do things that we weren't able to do before. And one of the things that we suggest to people is because when you look at what actually drives Alzheimer's disease at the molecular level, what you find is that there are dozens of contributors. And so we usually tell people, imagine you have a roof with 36 holes in it. You're not going to just cover one hole, you're going to cover as many as you can to get the best result. So if you wanted to go out and give yourself Alzheimer's disease, then you can actually produce the biochemistry of Alzheimer's disease relatively quickly. So you would go out and you would do everything wrong. You would eat a lot of trans fats, you would eat a lot of sugar, you would not take in a lot of fiber, for example. You would stay up all night, you would not get much sleep, you would have a tremendous amount of stress. You would get a chronic inflammation. So many ways to do that. Expose yourself to various organisms or eating sugar, trans fats, these sorts of things. You wouldn't want to eat vegetables and things that actually were rich with antioxidants. So all of those things would help you to drive your own biochemistry toward the biochemistry that's associated with high risk for Alzheimer's disease. And on the other hand, if you wanted to prevent that, you basically run that in reverse.
Medical historians in the future will look back on us and wonder how such an advanced society could perpetuate such a colossal blunder. This blunder persists because conventional medicine misunderstands the fundamental laws of biology. Modern industrial medicine treats disease with medication or surgery. When it comes to emergency interventions, this actually works. And we have the best medicine in the world, truly the best medicine in the world when it comes to trauma care and emergency care. When someone comes into the emergency room with a severed leg, conventional medicine treats the problem with incredible efficiency. But when it comes to chronic illness, this approach simply doesn't work. Conventional doctors have thought that you either have a disease or you don't. You have diabetes or you don't. There are no gray areas. We've developed no protocols for measuring and intervening in the disease process when it's in initial and most easily treatable stages.
Now we live in an age where our democracy has been hacked, money does call the shots, as the movie points out, and unfortunately everybody knows that's true. There is hope for changing that. There is an opportunity, particularly in the age of social media, to organize in the same ways that so many did during the generation of America's founders, to use truth, to use logic, to use a clear expression of what the real public interest is, to overcome the special interests that are trying to stop what's good for the public interest.
Okay, so this is your prescription medicine case, right?
Yes.
And you call this your what?
My traveling pharmacy.
It's your traveling pharmacy. Tell me about what you have to take every day.
All right. This row across the top is what I take in the morning. These bottles here are upside down because I take them twice a day. And these I take at night. Once a day at night, once a day, twice a day, morning and night, once a day in the morning.
According to drugwatch.com, Big Pharma has over 1,100 paid lobbyists, which partly explains the influence they have on Capitol Hill. From 1998 to 2014, they spent nearly $2.9 billion on lobbying expenses, more than any other industry. The report goes on to talk about the practice of hiring former government workers with valuable connections to gain political clout. The trade group Pharma has more than 50 current or former staff members who once served in the political arena.
But the deal is, let's say I'm a doctor and I know this. Let's say I'm a certified mainstream doctor. Okay, I'm an alternative medicine doctor, but just pretend that I am. Let's say I know these great alternative medicine things that can help you, and yet I have this, drug. Okay. The thing is, you have to realize if I mess up, I am legally responsible for that, because as the licensed doctor, when I give you advice, I tell you something to do and you do it and it goes wrong, then you come and sue me, and then what I have is this thing called insurance, and then so I pass responsibility to the insurance. So the thing is, it's part of the judicial branch of our government, the way the courts work, that as a medical professional, if I give you something that helps you, it's a risk to me, versus if I give you a drug, it may harm you, but the thing is, since it is the accepted method of treatment, it is easily defensible that this is what's accepted for this, I give you this drug, and if you get sick and then you come after me, I just send it to my insurance company and they pay for it because it's on the list of things that get paid for without even a second thought.
They actually have a lot of control, and I think that is a big secret, because we don't have an emphasis on that. We have a big emphasis on diagnosis and treatment with pharmaceuticals, not on prevention.
And it's unfortunately the case that much of our education in America is biased by, being filtered through a pharmaceutical lens. We learn about a one gene, one ill, one pill model. And in this way, doctors are very much only ever taught to manage symptoms through the use of pharmaceutical products. They aren't taught about the potential for individualized risks Often we have to do our own research to discover how it is that claims to efficacy are established.
Well, I was on pharmaceuticals that were prescribed to me, and did they offer some benefit? Yes. But, however, they also were side effects, pretty severe side effects. There were side effects that I couldn't live with, and I was told by my doctors that I had incurable conditions.
So, they looked at 38 positive trials, and of the 38 positive trials, 37 of them were published. Of the 37 negative trials, only 3 of them were published, 22 of them were unpublished, so really in a locked file drawer, and 11 of them were published as positive data, also often referred to as data dredging or statistical manipulation for a specific outcome that is in service to industry interests. So this is one of the ways that we can be left with the impression that there is efficacy when in fact, in this case, there were equal numbers of negative and positive studies, and we were only really exposed to the positive ones. To my best understanding, there is an unlimited number of trials that can be conducted before the 2 trials are selected. So in many ways, that's like tossing a coin until you get heads as many times as you want.
And when I started on the natural path, the holistic path to health, it made a world of difference, and there's no comparison. There's absolutely no comparison.
So I think doctors are very well-meaning people, and I think that the tools that they're offered are extremely limited, and they are in no way able, in a 10-minute visit, to meet the complexity of the modern patient, right? So doctors can only tell patients what it is that they've been taught.
I think for a number of years now, we've been a pill-pushing society where there's drug companies who have developed pills for just about everything, just about every condition or disease that we know of. And I think the public needs to demand that there's other treatments, there's other modalities that we can use to treat disease.
And the reason for that is because we have pharmaceutical drugs for certain diseases. So you have a system that's focused on identifying the disease so that then you can prescribe a medication. But there's many patients that present with dysfunctions without yet having a disease, and there's basically not much that you can do within the traditional healthcare system because you're looking for what pharmaceutical can I do to suppress these symptoms, not to understand it, not to try and figure out how is it intertwined to all the symptoms that a patient has, or the physical exam that you see, or the symptoms you see on physical exam. It's more